Well, thank you for coming. Some of you heard me speak this morning. So this session was a surprise to me because I put in the abstract to the conference and they said, no, would you include it in the other talk I did this morning? And then just before I came away from home, I discovered actually it was in the program. So I was like, I'm gonna get something together. So here we are. There's going to be some repeats because I was going to put it into the previous one, but I'm going to talk about my book, which the previous speaker very kindly put up on the screen. I actually thought it was my talk and that had come up. So apparently she found it really helpful. So that's amazing because that's why I wrote it. So, yeah. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Gillie Jenkinson. I'm a psychotherapist in the UK. I did my master's, my PhD, blah, blah, blah. And I was saying this morning, I have a little doggy who I adopted 9 months ago, and he was a little traumatized at 8 years old and having lost his owner and stuff, and he's just about settled now. And I have 2 beautiful daughters and a lovely life in the Hope Valley, which is the name of my organization, and a very beautiful area in England. So I touched on this morning, this issue, what is recovery? So this book is called Walking Free from the Trauma of Coercive, Cultic and Spiritual Abuse, a workbook for recovery and growth. So I'm going to just talk about what is recovery, what helps, and I'm just going to look a bit at my PhD research and then look at some of the data that came out around self-help and professional help. And then I'm going to give you an overview of the book and just talk you through kind of how it works and what you do with it. And look at the phases and regions, the milestones, and then there's a beautiful map that my illustrator and I worked on together, and I'm going to talk you through that. Okay. If you have questions, just do that. Okay. If I'm unclear or anything. So when we leave a group, we leave with baggage. Well, I did, even if you didn't. So there's stuff, stuff that we're carrying. And in the book, this is one of the exercises to reflect on what is the baggage, so you can sort of label these or do a different diagram or do it in a different way. But this is a sort of starting point to think, what is it that I'm grappling with? What are the issues that I want to resolve? And then there's also part of the exercise is where do I want to be at the end of the workbook? Because this is a workbook, it's not a novel, and it's not small. And when it arrived from the publisher, I was like, wow, that's big. I knew it was A4, which is the UK size, but I was like, woo. So anyway, we leave with baggage. But what is recovery? So I'm going to just spend a minute, here, recovery for those who've been in situations where the dynamics are very complex, it's notoriously challenging, especially without the right approach and information. And I guess if you've left a cult, you know that already, that it's like, where do I start? What's happened to me? I feel mad. I feel like I've lost my mind. I've lost everything, maybe my family. So how am I going to start on this journey, and where do I go next? So I read a short bit of this morning. So I said, I imagine you're interested in this workbook because you want to get over your experience and recover. But what does recovery look like? Is it that you never feel awful again, or never remember the bad experiences, or never cry about it again? I don't see it in these all or nothing terms. This is what some former members said. For me, it's overcoming something that is damaging, that has damaged me. I'm overcoming that handicap, that impairment, you know, the damage that the cult has done to me. And someone else said, recovery is moving toward healing from traumatic and difficult experiences. And somebody else said, recovery means no longer believing they're right. I thought that was quite a good one. And someone else said, I think the word recovery is helpful, because I asked them, is there a better word for me to use, you know, in the book? I tried to ask each, like, look really hard at each area. And they said, I think the word recovery is helpful because people are very down on themselves when they've been wrong, so wrong, or feel like they've been so wrong. And to think of yourself as a wounded person who is in recovery, it's a very gentle analogy. You come out wounded, but you can be healed. This is what recovery is. You could call it a process of healing. And this book is all about that process of healing, or certainly a stage of it. So I said earlier, recovery is not without emotion or memory. I found this in my personal experience and in clinical counselling with former members, that painful feelings related to memories of difficult and challenging incidents do emerge, but this does not necessarily mean we are not recovering or recovered. Recovery means we are able to face memories and painful feelings and be curious about them. But we can also we can withdraw from them without getting stuck in them, because it's so easy to get kind of stuck in those traumatic triggers. But so we don't go down the rabbit hole and get stuck in fight and flight or freeze, or we don't get stuck as often. So it's not an all or nothing thing. Like, I've been out of my cult for many, many years, and sometimes I do trigger, but it's like something that happens, like mostly it's fine, and then sometimes it happens. Before, it was a minefield, always happening and really blinding me, where am I? And I think that's the recovery process, is when it's happening less and less. Because, you know, the previous speaker talking about the nervous system, and, you know, we have memories. You know, we can't really lobotomize our history. We shouldn't really. We're made up of where we've come from. And so, you know, it's not a black and white issue. It's not I'm this or I'm that. It's that I'm learning, I'm growing. And there have been times when I think I've processed something, and then it seems to come back, sometimes with more baggage, because difficult memories are triggered, or there is still more to process. It can seem overwhelming and disheartening, but I've learned to welcome this with curiosity most of the time. I'm not saying, you know, oh, great, you know, but curiosity rather than fight it. I think of it as new information about myself, and so embrace it as part of my life story. So actually sometimes triggers a kind of another piece of the jigsaw of my life. And I learned to become really curious about my story. You know, how did I get to where I am? How did I get into the cult? How has it been so hard? Why was I so broken by it? Because I am not the person I was when I left. I was utterly, utterly broken by it, and silenced, and had no confidence. You wouldn't recognize me. And I remember one day my husband said to me, he said, well, who knew? Like, we met in the cult, and then how, you know, therapy and learning about this stuff, I've recovered, you know. But actually those little triggers, the pieces of information that I think, as I learned to be curious, I think, oh yeah, gosh, yeah, that happened to me. Yeah, that's put that piece in place. There's more, but it's in the book, and I'll run out of time again. So I mentioned this morning for those who were there, but you know, I think that when we're subjected to brainwashing or thought form throughout our life and into adulthood, we form an identity to comply and fit in. We have to fit in if we're in a cult. You can't be you know, a wacky individual who's doing whatever, which hopefully we are now and can become. But you know, I think my children call it eccentric, which is the polite way of saying. So, you know, but we have to fit in. I call that the cult pseudo-identity. Somebody else probably calls it something else. You know, it's just trying to formulate some word for it. And I see it kind of overlaying, you know, the real me, or what I call the authentic identity, those seeds, the parts of us that are really us. So all who grow up into adulthood form a cultic pseudo-identity. But for SGAs and MGAs, that's second and multi-generation, it's deeper, more entangled, and it's harder to really unpick. But it can be unpicked, and I've done it with many people. So to recover, we need to recognise and unlayer the pseudo-identity and free our real me underneath. But how? Well, we do this by understanding how this occurred and the dynamics within the coercive, cultic, or spiritually abusive setting. So if we don't understand the dynamics, we're very likely to blame ourselves. Oh, it's me, I'm rebellious, loaded language, that's cult language, I'm sinful, I'm bad, I have ego, you know, depending on the different kinds of groups. And we do it by understanding, and I think we do it in phases. So, and this came out of my PhD research and asking former members, what do you think helps? And I realized that, look, there'll be other phases, there's probably other structures like this that could be applied, but the way I think of it is each one is describing a focus in therapy, probably mostly in therapy, maybe in life. Phase one is the need to leave physically and begin to leave psychologically. So if we're still in the group, it's very difficult to recover. Some people really do try and they manage to kind of remain in the group, and I think it's very hard, but you can't really walk away from it psychologically when you're still being probably abused and influenced. Then phase two is cognitively understanding, and those are the aspects that starts to build our real me or our authentic identity and helps us to unlayer the pseudo-identity. It's a focus. It's not to say we don't do emotional work, but we focus on understanding. And this book is really written for phase two, for that psychoeducational or psychological education and understanding. And then phase three is the emotional healing aspect, because there's a lot of work to do around emotional healing and understanding emotions. And then a chapter in here on emotions and how cults actually, coercive cultic groups affect our emotions. Again, there'll be much more to say, but it's a beginning of a conversation and a reflection. And at phase three, it's probably really important to find a good therapist who can help you. Maybe they can work through this with you, or if they're a cult-informed therapist, you're lucky. And, you know, they'll be able to help you do that sort of developmental work, addressing feelings, trauma, focusing on that, grief and loss, all of those sort of emotional things that happen at that stage. And then phase four is a sort of recognition. So for first generation, oh, I'm myself again. That's what one of my participants said. Or actually, I'm beginning to find for second and multi-generation, those seeds, those aspects of myself that actually are different to other people. There's similarities of some things, but actually this is me. This is, I love this and I don't like that, and colours. Someone mentioned this morning, colours, that kind of thing. And then post-traumatic growth, which is a theory about how we can grow in spite of and sometimes because of the trauma. It has to be handled very carefully, because it's not a measure of recovery or anything, but it's a case of actually, so I wouldn't be doing this if I hadn't gone into a cult. So that's an aspect of post-traumatic growth, of kind of using, you know, what I learned. Yeah, any questions? Is that clear? So this is all about different focuses, if that's a word. Foci, I don't know. So from the doctoral research, which all that means is that I interviewed 29 former members and I asked them, what do you think helps us former members recover? And there were lots of things, but undergirding these 4 phases were self-help strategies. And you all know about that because you've searched the internet, you bought Janja Lalich's book, you bought Dan Shaw's books, maybe you bought this book, it's fairly newly out, but somebody bought it, so that's really great. You know, and you watch movies about it, and that's self-help. And then there are professional help strategies, which is you go and see a psychologist or, you know, cult informed, or a therapist, cult informed or not. And so this book kind of addresses both aspects. If you have a question, remember, just put your hand up. So self-help strategies is about being proactive in reading and processing, and actually that does build our authentic identity. It builds the sense of, actually, I'm choosing this book and not that book, or there's some choices there. That's actually you expressing yourself, if you realise it or not. And this is a term that people use. It ensures the locus of control. Self-help, kind of the control is with you. You know, you're looking for it. You're making those choices. You don't have another person there saying, well, I think you should look at this, or you should do that, or may I suggest you do that, which can be helpful. But this is giving that locus of control back. The individual learns to trust and think for themselves. It encourages autonomy. And hopefully it encourages critical thinking, because you've got the space to think for yourself. And I think often when we've been so controlled in a cult, we can tend to do what the other person thinks we should do, maybe be too compliant. I was like that for years. And so, you know, just brings it back to us. And one definition of self-help was concerted, self-initiated efforts to modify your behaviour, and I added help you recover, without professional treatment. However, it does not mean that you cannot or should not turn to useful books, films, websites and support groups for additional assistance. So walking free is one route to recovery, and it's based on 30 years of experience working with survivors, former members. I worked in a rape crisis centre for 11 years, so I kind of had a lot of experience there working with trauma, and then really specialising in this field and then doing the research. And I had a diploma in pastoral counselling, which was really part of my exiting from my Bible-based cult. And it was really helpful because I actually had very sane, kind tutors who I'm still in touch with, and who were like, what? One of the things I was taught in the cult is you do counselling for 3 hours with everybody, like 3 hours, imagine. And when they said, well, maybe an hour or 50 minutes, I was like, you can't do that, you know. So I had some pretty mad ideas, actually. And also that you had to pray for clients. Well, they didn't agree with that because it was, you know, like it's not for me to do that. But I thought that's what I had to do because I had that in my head. So what's happened over the years is I've evolved and developed an approach which I called post-cult counselling, but I'm actually in the process of changing that to the walking free model, counselling for coercive, cultic and spiritual abuse, just to bring it all together. But with the therapists I trained and myself, we used a much shorter version of this, which this was based on, which I called the Recovery Workbook. And so what we would do is all the clients who came to us knew we were going to go through the Recovery Workbook. Not everyone wanted to do it, but it proved at phase 2 to be very successful, and we've monitored it and see real big shifts, particularly in full-blown cult survivors. And so what I did with the book was try to articulate what I would be saying to clients and put my voice into it. And I think on the whole that's happened. And also it's been made into an audio book. So I had quite a big wrangle with the Routledge sending me these people like, you know, and I was like, oh, we can't have that person reading this book. You know, we needed something kind of soft and something you can actually bear to listen to. So we'll see. I think that's in the process at the moment. I've lost track of what's happening. So in Walking Free, I've articulated what I say in therapy. And I'm really grateful to you showing it. I thought it was my talk. I went, oh, it's there. So thank you. And I'm really happy it's been helpful. So all this learning has been gathered up into it. And just a bit of background, you know, I've never had massive amount of confidence, and I spent ages trying to work on the book and how will I do it, and will I write it for therapists and then add a bit for clients or former members. And around the time of COVID, when we were going into lockdown, it was the spring, and I remember all the daffodils, and it's just suddenly the name came to me, and it just sort of went, yeah, actually I know what I need to do. And then a lot more hard work after that. But I submitted the proposal to Routledge, fully expecting them to say no, because I've tried publishing things in the past and it's like, no. And then I was told the board unanimously and enthusiastically accepted my proposal, which I really hated. So, and then the even harder work happened of trying to hit deadlines and finish it off. And my husband, Tony, was my editor. He's a brilliant writer. He's really clear and sharp. And so, you know, he sharpened it up in areas where maybe I was waffling, and I never waffle. And it was published in May 23. And it's amazing. I can't believe it. So the structure of Walking Free, which some of you know and some don't, is we ended up putting it into parts. Like with these things, you can do so many different things with them, but part 1 is setting the scene. So it's an introduction to the book and the navigation of the book. What challenges might there be? What is recovery? And choosing your destination, as I said. So it's really important to read that chapter, and part 3, preparing for the journey. exercises on looking after yourself, safe enough. We need to be safe enough as we go through this process, take care of ourselves. There are grounding tips and journaling tips to help to process stuff as you go on through the book. And then a reflection on which generation are you, maybe a reflection on your family tree, create a timeline. Those things can happen at a later date, but you could just know about it and think, actually, as I go through the book, maybe I will fill out the timeline. I don't know about you, but trauma has a huge effect on time. You know, when I was writing my life story, which is part 2, just a sort of brief summary, I was like, when did that happen? What year was that? Like, it's a long time ago, but it was more than just, I couldn't remember. It was like, I can't think straight. I just can't seem to put this in order. And it really helped, and others have said it really helped to put things in order. Oh, this happened then. Because a lot of stuff happened for me in about 3 months. And it seemed like 10 years. But actually it was 3 months, and then you think, oh, gosh, you know, so if it's helpful, it's helpful. If it isn't, you leave it, you carry on, or you can come back to it. It's a book, you can do what you like, you know. And then part 4 is the meat of it, the real kind of the journey, the walking free journey. And that's the psychological education. A colleague of mine said he hates psychoeducation. He said, I don't want to be educated by psychos. All right, we'll say psychological education. And this is, you know, what I'm going to come to with the roadmap. And then there's part 5 and 6 is around therapy. Part 5 is seeking therapy. It's very general advice. There's a bit of advice for people who want to become therapists, because often former members want to become therapists, I've noticed. And it's a lovely way to give back. Yeah. The phases I explained to you become regions on the roadmap. And I'm going to show you this in a sec. And just trying to keep track of the time. And there are milestones, which are the psychological areas that have been shown to be helpful, that's come through the research, through the recovery workbook, tried and tested. And some people thought the milestones were gravestones. But in England or in the UK, we have these stones on the side of the road that say so many miles to somewhere. And that's what this was really, is like, this is a milestone. We say, oh, it's a milestone, you know. So I don't know, the artist and I spent ages, how can we make it not look like a gravestone? And somebody said, oh, well, I thought they were sitting by a gravestone. I was like, what? So one of the milestones, just for example, is this idea of introjects, N5. And an introject is a belief or behaviour that we've taken into ourselves without consciously assessing it. It is swallowed whole and remains sitting in our psychological system like a lump of unchewed and undigested food in our gut. So we've swallowed what we're told who we should be. The pressures put on us within the cultic setting make it almost impossible to chew over what we're told or what happens to us. And so these things may remain within us and cause discomfort. You know, if I've been told you are not allowed to have holidays, you can't, thank you, you know, and that's still sitting in us, or you shouldn't ever have a break or whatever, then, you know, that needs challenging. So in order to recover, we need to highlight and challenge those introjects. And these can also become phobias. So there's sections on these in milestone 5, as well as critical thinking. So milestone 5 has these 3 aspects to it: highlighting introjects and lots of examples, how they become phobias. You know, I can't possibly do anything other than what the cult says, or I feel this terrible fear. So it's an attempt to help to undo those. And then what is critical thinking? So back to publishing the book, I had some great endorsements from some lovely people, which you can see, and I was very grateful for those. And I approached Camilla Charnock, who's a brilliant map illustrator, and she drew the map and all the milestones, etc. So the map. So a lot of information, it's in the front of the book. So I'm going to come over here. So here, the person is leaving with the baggage way down. I was originally going to have the cult here, but it wasn't necessary. And they're coming out, they're struggling, and all the artist put the little bird in. The bird kind of follows you around the journey. And then we want the person to pick up a map, this map, and journal. So it's suggested have a journal alongside. You can then write, because there's lots of worksheets in this book. There's lots of exercises, lots of suggestions, and you can have a look at it, you know, if you want to flick through it, or there's one in the foyer as well. And just before I go, if you do want to get it, there's some little flyers next to it with a code, and you can get a reduction through Routledge. They've done it specially for the conference, so you can get £3 or £4 or whatever off. So then the person comes and it's like, well, where shall I go? What do I do? So there's a suggestion, maybe you can go this way. The robin is following them. And this is region 1, which is phase 1, which is leaving. So the milestone here is leaving, and it's a reflection on issues around leaving, like different people's experiences, a discussion about it, and then a chance to think about how did I get to leave? And then we come through into region 2, and so the first one is facing doubts. That could almost have been in phase 1, but I ended up putting it here. So facing doubts is milestone 2, and this is really important. Some people get out because of their doubts. And then diagnose your group or relationship. Was it a cult? Was it coercive control? Was it spiritual abuse? And then maybe you can come up with your own definition of what it all that together. So you can really look at that. Then confluence. Confluence is merging. When we merged and enmeshed with the group, and we can't withdraw from it. So we look at that. We look at introject. Who are you? Yeah, this is interesting, isn't it? Understanding trauma is a very big chapter, but it's really an important one, and I've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible. It's a very, it can feel heavy to people, but I hope it's not too much. And you can always choose not to do things because it's self-help. Then there's setting boundaries, which is about having the difference between anger and rage. Having healthy anger is actually essential for our boundary setting, and rage is a trauma-related response. So that's a whole big piece in there. Healthy self-love, and then you come over the bridge. This is like preparing in a way, and you come over the bridge, and then we walk along. You can go up these side roads if you've had enough. You're not trapped on the road. You can go back, you can do what you like. And thought reform, milieu control, mystical manipulation, demand for purity, confession, sacred science, doctrine over person, loading the language, dispensing of existence. And I put a bench on each hill because it's more of an effort, understanding thought reform. And then we come down to other controlling dynamics, which is cognitive dissonance, blinds, double bind and gaslighting. It's a short chapter. And then unmasking the leader. This is essential, absolutely essential. And then we come into region 3, which is the focus on emotion. And that's phase 3, where we do the therapy. But this is a book, so we having the time to reflect. And then we come into region 4, which is reflecting is the post-traumatic growth aspect. And there's a lot of questions of what did I learn? Did I learn anything? Whatever, a lot of stuff. And then we can either go back on the footpath and think, actually, I need to revisit, or we come on and we move on. And there's a whole lot of ideas here about moving on and just tips. And this in the middle, Oasis Lake, is really important, that we always taking care of ourselves. We're stopping if it's too much. We talk to a friend if we feel overwhelmed. And or we go and lie in a boat and read a book, or lie under the tree, or whatever. So that's the map, and I hope you like it. It's there to colour in. I had it so that you could colour in the pictures. Colouring is really cathartic, actually. And yeah, that's that. That's what that looks like. That's that. And that's it.